I want to welcome you to the breakout sessions for CloudCon integration and web APIs. This is the session for Alistair Farquharson, CTO of SOA Software. Alistair, welcome back.
Hi there, Vance. Thanks for having me.
At SOA Software, Alistair spearheads product design and development of many products, including SOA, web services, and API and cloud technologies. He is an expert, in fact, in distributed environments of all kinds, as well as software lifecycles, with a focus on governance and management. That's going to come in terrifically handy today in his session, Using APIs for Better Business Partnerships, where Alistair will explore this explosive use of web APIs and a special focus on how IT and line of business are working together to design and launch a whole range of projects that improve the business. We'll even get a look a bit under the covers about how to plan, build, run, and promote your APIs and some customer examples. And just a quick reminder before I hand it back to Alistair, you can download his slides by clicking the link right under the viewing area. You'll also see in that region that Alistair's brought some other terrific downloads on the SOA software vision and technology for APIs. And we love your questions here, so to communicate with Alistair, just type into the Ask a Question box. And now, Alistair, tell us about using APIs for better business partnerships.
Thank you, Vance. So as Vance said, I'm going to talk a little bit about using APIs for business partnerships. The topic of this presentation is primarily geared towards business leaders, or at least people in IT that are really trying to meet the needs of an agile business and a business that is facing unusual pressures today from both cloud and mobile devices. So to preface my discussion, why don't we look a little bit ahead and look at two significant forces that are really changing the face of business today. On the one hand, we have cloud computing. And cloud computing has a number of different facets to it, or personalities to it. We have software as a service, we have platform as a service, we have infrastructure as a service. There are different kinds of cloud providers. There might be internal cloud that's owned by your IT department. There might be external cloud. There might be cloud platforms that your partners are using. Businesses might be buying software as a service solutions with or without the participation of IT. And in general, cloud is really changing the face of both business as well as the day-to-day tasks facing IT. On the second side of this coin, so to speak, there is a rapidly growing channel of devices and mobile devices. So when you look at these two forces that are changing the face of business, on the one side, we have a new platform to deploy on and a new set of systems and a new set of services that IT is using. And on the right-hand side, there's a whole bunch of new business channels that are being enabled. If you think about mobile devices and you think about the Internet of Things, there's a huge demand to actually meet and address the business needs in these areas and create effective business channels. So I'm going to talk about these two forces that are affecting both business as well as IT in very, very material ways. And I'm going to talk about how APIs are becoming very commonplace in what is effectively a new economy here. So let's look at the effects of cloud. So on the left-hand side of the equation, we basically have cloud. And cloud is in the process of commoditizing IT. Whether you like to hear that message or not, what we're seeing is a lot of interesting things happening within IT departments today. We're seeing business making decisions that IT is simply not involved in. We're seeing businesses buying software as a service without consultation from IT. We're seeing businesses leverage platforms. We're seeing businesses trying to cater towards platforms and the platforms that their partners are using. On the other side of the coin, for the more aware IT departments, we're seeing IT that is evolving to use cloud. So we're seeing that app development and app test and development is moving outside of the boundaries of the original organization. In general, we're seeing that there's a certain amount of commoditization of IT, but we're also seeing an interesting effect here that the barrier is being lowered for app developers and startups. And what I mean by this is that there is a growing channel of developers, startups, partners that are moving faster and faster in terms of their agility, simply because they are leveraging cloud. They're cloud native, so to speak. So we're finding that there's a whole bunch of new channels and a whole bunch of new partnerships that are emerging simply because these people can actually leverage the agility that is associated with cloud. So we're seeing that the pace of business is increasing. And what it's doing is it's basically forcing these businesses to focus on their core competencies. And I'll explain more about this later on, but it's causing a very interesting shift in the way that people think about apps and the way that people think about APIs, and even the way that people think about their business. Simply keeping up with the pace of change is causing people to focus on what is their core value and how they can actually expose their core value and make money in the process. So now let's look at the other effect, the right-hand side of this equation. The effect of mobile and devices in general is becoming more and more of a priority for business. If you just look at the statistics, the number of mobile devices now exceeds the number of PCs in the world today. So simply the fact that we're becoming a more and more connected society means that these mobile devices are becoming a more and more prevalent channel. I know that myself personally, if I can do something on my mobile phone without having to stop and boot up my computer and start using that, I would rather do it. Even if it's a little bit more difficult to use, I'm going to use my mobile device. And the advent of native applications on the mobile device and all of these kinds of technologies really makes it a viable channel for the business. In addition to that, we're seeing that the number of connected devices, popularly called the Internet of Things, is going to exceed the number of mobile devices by 2020. So you're looking at an explosion in the number of connected devices, mobile phones and other devices, by 2020, which is not very far away. So it's becoming a really, really valid channel for the business, or even a priority when it comes to the business. I was watching a television commercial the other day, and they started the television commercial by talking about the mobile device. And then they zoomed out and they said, and look at the case that this mobile device is in, and they showed the rest of the car. So it's becoming a real priority for consumers, and it's becoming a significant channel for businesses as to how do they address all of these connected devices and systems. So you're seeing a huge emergence of new business channels, as well as a huge pressure from cloud and cloud-based computing that is seriously affecting the way people do business and are structuring their IT organizations today. So let's take a little bit of a look at the net effect, or the way that I like to look at the net effect. At the bottom you have fundamentally what is a shrinking internal IT department. You know, the number of systems are bound by the boat anchors that exist within IT, which is typically data sources and security mechanisms. But what we're seeing is that the emergence of cloud is creating IT-owned systems within the cloud. It's creating a whole new set of partner and other applications in the cloud. And then, of course, there's all the software as a service that the business is signing up to. So what you're seeing is an inverse hourglass. You're seeing a lot of expansion of capabilities and systems within the cloud, and you're seeing a shrinking internal IT department. This doesn't mean that IT as a whole is shrinking, because you've got to include the IT-owned parts that exist in the cloud. But what I'm saying is that a lot of development and a lot of activities and a lot of the platforms are moving to the cloud. But I think that the more interesting thing is the middle piece here, where the partners and other apps exist. And simply by the fact that cloud is increasing the pace of development, you're starting to see more and more app development and more partners existing and moving into the cloud. And what that means is that the pace of that development is accelerating, and the number of partners is accelerating, and the need for the business to meet or to connect with those partners is accelerating. So businesses are simply seeing more and more partners. And then you look at mobile and devices, and this is the ultimate source of all this demand. All of these partners and apps that you're talking to and communicating with are ultimately providing backends for these mobile devices and other devices in the Internet of Things. So that's the ultimate driver for this shift to cloud potentially, as well as the shift to using APIs within your business. So let's look at APIs. So I really believe that APIs are the key here. If I'm exposing a set of backend systems to a set of cloud-based applications, whether they be the ones that I own, the ones that my partners have, or the apps that are being built in the cloud or software as a service, that communication mechanism between those cloud-based applications and my internal systems is happening through an API, or more than one API. Secondarily, all of these cloud-based applications are exposing APIs to all of the devices and mobile devices that are the channels for these particular applications. So I'm building APIs, and APIs are sort of fundamentally becoming the fabric that ties cloud-based applications with internal IT-based applications and mobile and web-based applications. And I really believe the API is becoming the currency in this new economy that we're seeing emerging. Just as an example, if you look at mobile and device APIs, companies are building these APIs to meet the needs of tablets, web applications, gaming consoles, mobile devices, smartphones, connected cars, appliances, websites, enterprise apps, and partners. I could go on and on. And it's really interesting to think about the changing face of business. That's a slightly obscure statement, but if I look at my own personal behavior on a cell phone, I will go and I will download a particular app. And that app is not owned by a particular organization. It might be a travel app, for example. And that travel app is interacting with a lot of different travel organizations, or let's say an airline, right? Let's say there's an airline out there that has exposed an API. And I'm using a travel app that actually interacts with that airline. Now, my use of that travel app is very fickle. I'm going to download the next coolest travel app next week. These travel apps come and go. These devices come and go. These channels come and go. So when you look at how an organization, how an enterprise needs to meet the needs of this very fluid app development or app economy, they need to expose an API to almost distance themselves or decouple themselves from this highly agile app development lifecycle. If I'm an organization like an airline and I try and write my own applications, my own mobile apps to keep up with the pace of business, I'm going to be left in the dust. What I need to do is I need to build an API that all of these people who are building mobile apps can use and expose cool new functionality to their customers and not leave me out of the equation. So I build an API and I have 101 people building mobile apps for me. They're going in and out of fashion. People are downloading them, using them, throwing them away, getting the next thing, downloading that and using that. But at the end of the day, myself as an organization, as an airline, is not being left out of the equation. They're still using my API. The different apps, they all use the same backend APIs at the end of the day. And I, as a travel airline, are still putting bodies in my seats on an airplane. So when you think about the shifting app economy and you think about the sheer number of apps, I think that there's a couple of million apps out there in the various app stores. And I think that for 2013, they're predicting that there'll be 56 billion app store downloads this year. So that sheer number of apps that are being downloaded and the sheer velocity within that channel means that an enterprise cannot keep up with that. What they need to do is decouple themselves from that life cycle. Let those people go ahead and build these apps to meet these demands, try to make their own money, create startups, build new and cool and exciting apps in the cloud, and still leverage my backend functionality and still allow me to make money while enabling them to make money as well. So that's what these two driving forces are colluding and creating. The cloud, on the one hand, is increasing the pace of development. It's allowing these app developers to build new apps quickly. It's allowing new startups to emerge and build their apps and deploy their apps quickly into a scalable infrastructure. And on the other side of the coin, we have the incredible demand from these mobile devices and just the Internet of Things that is creating incredible pressure and incredible demand for these apps. It's impossible for an enterprise to keep up with it themselves. They need to go out, they need to build an API, and they need to build a platform and a community of developers around that API. So when you hear people talking about the app economy and the API economy, this is exactly what they mean. So let's look at a couple of examples. So if I look at a financial company, for instance, they might be looking for a couple of different B2B initiatives, like branded stored value cards. A credit card company might go out and say, well, I'm going to create a bunch of stored value cards for gift vouchers. Or I might go and start branding my credit cards for different companies or stores. Or I might want to allow people to pay on different websites with points, or with mobile apps with points, or maybe transfer points between mobile devices. Cool and interesting ideas like this are emerging all the time, and financial companies are exposing APIs to meet this need. Then there are things that are business to developer focused, like maybe micropayment or micro lending, which is very exciting because it allows people to create a whole new economy around micropayments and microlending using mobile applications. Let's take a look at travel as an example. So a lot of travel companies, they outsource mobile app development. They have a lot of travel partners. I mean, they've essentially syndicated the booking of airfares out to a bunch of different travel partners. So how do they actually create an arm's length relationship with all of these travel partners so they don't have to rebuild a different API for every single different travel partner? Well, what they need to do is sit back, figure out how they're going to build an API, and publish that API as an organization and treat it as a product. And I'll get onto that in a second. We're also seeing a lot of travel organizations create things like exchanges within the hospitality industry, or exchanges whereby they can exchange points with other organizations that have points and rewards programs. So there's a lot of interesting examples and a lot of interesting ways that people can build apps, mobile apps, etc., that leverage APIs that travel companies are providing. So what this all means to an organization is that there is a growing number of partnerships. I mentioned before that the structure of IT is kind of changing, and the number of partnerships is growing exponentially. There's these SaaS providers, there's a growing community of these very high velocity app developers, and then there are all of the mobile and device partners that may or may not be building apps for you. So to meet the needs of the cloud-based developers and the mobile and device channel, companies need to put together an API strategy and a platform. So let's look briefly at the API strategy itself. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. We have white papers and things that go into this in a bit more detail, but just to summarize, an organization needs to focus on product. They need to avoid the proliferation of APIs by moving the center of gravity to the partner or the third party. In the past, we've built APIs or created connections with our B2B partners on a one-to-one basis. That needs to change because the sheer number of partners is growing beyond a point where that is scalable. So organizations need to sit down, they need to build an API, they need to market it as a product, and they need to go out to their partners and say, this is my API, it's not changing for you. You have to code to my API. And in general, the kinds of channels and partners and the general changes in attitude that we're seeing are really open to this. In the past, maybe not. But in the new economy and the new way that apps are being built, people are more accepting of this kind of structure because it's the only thing that really scales. I also think that you need to focus on the API as a product, and what I mean by that is you need to market it, you need to support it, you need to manage it, you need to brand it. It needs to become part and parcel of your business. You then need to provide funding, and what I mean by this is at a CEO level, there needs to be commitment from the organization. So in the same way as a website is funded, an API strategy needs to be funded. It needs to be marketed. Facebook didn't go out and create the Graph API and just throw it out there. They funded it, they marketed it, they thought about it in great detail, and they went to market with a Graph API to meet the needs of their consumers. And then there's a certain amount of restructuring of the organization, creation of new roles and new processes to actually support that API strategy. Secondarily, you need an API platform. And the API platform provides a set of capabilities that are laid out in this slide. You might have a set of analytics that measures the impact of your programs. You should have some way to engage with these app developers and a way to build your developer and partner ecosystem through a website or through a portal. You're going to need gateway services. You're going to need to come up with some way to secure and protect your back-end systems. If you're going to be exposing an API, you need to make sure that that API is stable, it's well protected, it's secure, it's reliable. Then you're going to need to do some level of service integration. And this is a way to speed up and simplify your API development. As an organization, you probably have a set of internal systems and services, and you need to figure out how can you quickly expose an API? How can you quickly meet the needs of the business? So you need to figure out how you're going to integrate those back-end data systems and those services on the back end to create and build your API. And then last but not least, you need to figure out how to build the right services and APIs the right way. And you need to therefore think about how you're going to do lifecycle management and how that's going to affect your business processes and your software development processes. So if you look at an API platform, the lifecycle management, the integration, the gateway services, the developer engagement portal, and last but not least, the analytics, these are the set of capabilities that a business needs to think about when they start exposing an API. Without these, you're probably going to fall on your face. So SOA software into the picture now, we have a set of products that actually meet the requirements of a platform. Starting at the bottom, we have a lifecycle manager product that provides the lifecycle management to organizations. And what I mean by that is ways to get you up and running quickly. It's all about speed in this game. You need to expose an API, you need to be agile, you need to meet the needs of the app developers, you need to be able to support lots of app developers moving quickly, building apps to meet the needs of the channel. So the Lifecycle Manager provides best practices, templates, processes that you can adopt as an organization to get up and running quickly and hopefully not forget anything in your overall API strategy. Things like documentation, legal agreements, API definition and modeling. All of these kinds of things we've tried to speed up the learning curve for organizations that are adopting and putting out an API. Then our Unified Gateway provides the integration services and the gateway services. So how do you actually technically expose this API, and how do you protect yourself from any kind of negative effect of exposing this API? How do you make sure it's secure and it runs right and it behaves well? Then we have a Community Manager product that provides the developer portal, which is brandable and becomes the face of your organization to this app developer community. And it also provides you with the analytics to see how your organization is doing and whether or not the API program is successful. To give you a feel for what these things look like, here's an example of a very simple developer portal, but it can be branded and modernized or customized any which way that you want to meet and to fit in with your own brand. When you look at analytics, you need to be able to give people visibility into what's working and what is not working from a business as well as a technical perspective. When you're looking at integration, you need simple ways of being able to hook things together to expose an API or simplify a complex backend system to create an easily consumable API on the front end. And then last but not least, the Lifecycle Manager allows you to track things. It ensures standards and practices are followed, tracks different versions, provides documentation, templates, best practices, etc. All of these capabilities are available both in the cloud, if you want to get up and running really quickly, or on-premise if you have security and privacy concerns or regulatory concerns that prevent you from using a cloud-based infrastructure. We also have hybrid models where you can mix and match these things together. And with that, I thank you. My name is Alistair Farquharson. I'm the CTO of SOA Software. And back to you, Vance.
Alistair, thank you. That was a really terrific overview of how APIs are becoming a new way of thinking about mediation between the idea of cloud and SaaS and mobile systems. Really, really thoughtful presentation. And especially like the examples. It's triggered some good questions here. And with your permission, let's get right to the questions.
Okay.
A couple of themes come in about your idea that APIs are the key to bringing these forces together, at least helping IT get a better handle on it. And just generally, can you give an example of how APIs helped IT not just leverage but gain more control over, say, an LOB-driven cloud initiative or a mobile or a BYOD initiative?
Well, Vance, the API is really the connective tissue, right? If you have a mobile initiative, if you have a mobile application, for instance, running on an iPhone device or something else, it's going to be using APIs to communicate back to the business. Now, the problem from an IT perspective is, how is that API defined? What backend systems does it connect to? How is it secured? So they have practical concerns about the API and its effect to the backend systems. All the business wants to do, of course, is meet the needs of this mobile channel and start making money. So it really depends on your perspective. So if you're looking at putting infrastructure in place, like our products, the business people are going to be very interested in the analytics and the developer engagement activities. So how many developers, how many apps, how quickly are these apps getting online, how many developers do they have in their community, how successful are these apps? In other words, how much transaction volume are these apps producing? The analytics around the subscriptions into the developer portal, as well as the analytics around each of the individual apps, is very, very important from a business perspective. From an IT perspective, the same system gives you control around security and single sign-on and monitoring. And more importantly, I think it's all around quality of service. So the IT folks can determine what their committed capacity is and how much of that committed capacity is being used. And they can control the quality of service for various applications that are out there and determine whether or not there's any compromise or any denial of service or any hostile kind of attack taking place. So I think different people have different concerns. IT guys, definitely an integration problem. How do they actually expose the API? How do they make sure the API is good API, it's well defined, it's easily used, it's protected, it's secured? And then the business people are looking to see how well their marketing campaigns are doing. So how good are they at letting app developers know that the API is there, and are they presenting a good enough business proposition to these app developers to get them to use that API? So all of these things can be provided by a well-executed API strategy and an implemented platform.
You know, a really great discussion, because here's a question that kind of follows up on at least of two of those key themes, Alistair. And the question here says, I've seen where bigger internet companies like Amazon and eBay use APIs quite prevalently now. Should we adopt that same model, or is that just for seasoned internet-savvy companies?
No. I mean, the short answer is yes, you should absolutely adopt it. I mean, I firmly believe that the API is the new website. And what I mean by that is it is a very prolific, or will be a very prolific, business channel for an organization. People who don't expose APIs are potentially missing out on the app economy and these mobile devices and mobile applications that are being used. The 56 billion downloads in a year represents a really significant channel for the business. And if you don't go out and build an API and figure out what your value is as a business from an API perspective, then you're going to lose out a little bit, or maybe a lot. I mean, organizations that did not get online, did not embrace the e-commerce or the web economy, some of them went out of business, or at least were severely impacted by a late time to market. And frankly, building an API is not an incredibly difficult thing to do. You can put out an API by leveraging our platform as a service initiative as an example, and get that API out there and running pretty quickly. And at least you can start learning about what makes a good API and what your partners might want or need. Some customers only expose APIs privately to partners. Some organizations embrace a more open API strategy where they will support somebody in their garage writing the next mobile application. So it really depends on the business, but I do encourage businesses to begin to at least understand what APIs are and what they can do, and at least get their toes wet in terms of implementing an API and trying to address it.
And here's a related question. I think this comes from maybe both the business or the architect side. And the question here says, can you briefly describe what an API lets me do that writing a well-defined app or subscribing to a cloud service can't do?
Absolutely. So they're very different things. What an API does is allow other people to write apps and cloud-based applications that you don't have to pay for, that ultimately creates a channel for your business. If you think about how much it costs an organization to write a mobile app and maintain a mobile app, and the potential customers that they can reach with that mobile app. Think about that, and then think about the cost of that, and then think about the associated cost of building an API where you have 20 apps, or an API that 20 apps are using, 20 apps that you're not paying for, that you're not supporting, that you're not managing, that reaches a whole group of consumers that you don't have to target yourself. So there's this community of app developers, whether they be cloud-based app or mobile-based app, it doesn't really matter. These people are going out, investing money, trying to get customers, and they're bringing customers to you through your API. So it's far more scalable to expose an API than to build a mobile application.
Very interesting. And the show does talk about integration as one of the key focuses of where the API initiative might start. So just in the deference to the integration developer, kind of a technical question here, Alistair. Can you describe the internal architecture of a good and well-formed API? Is it simply an entry point to a back-end system, or should the API actually include some discrete services, such as security or business logic?
So the API that you build depends on the channel or the device that is going to be using it. You might build an API that's SOAP. You may. An API does not preclude or define or require a particular protocol. The thing that defines an API is the business approach. It's productized, it's marketed, it's built to meet the need of a particular set of consumers. So I believe that APIs are a superset of services. But that aside, when I look at an API, it's designed from the top down, or the outside in, for want of a better term. And what I mean by that is you need to go out and design the API that meets the needs of your partners or your consumers or your app developers, depending on the devices that they're building their apps for. So it might be REST JSON, it might be WebSockets because you're doing HTML5, it might be XML, it could be a variety of different protocols and technologies. But the important thing here is that you're building the API from the top down. In other words, you're looking at what your customers want and the needs of your channel, building the API, and then you're going to be mapping it to the back-end systems. So when I talked about the application integration layer within your API platform, that is where you're making call-outs, you're mapping essentially your API and its definition to the existing internal services and data sources that you have. And it might be a mashup or a composition of multiple service calls. You might have to do some development internally. You might have to do some filtering or simplification. But all of that stuff occurs in that platform that we provide to our customers.
Excellent. And so this has been such a great session. Speaking of customers, I think maybe we have time for one more question, and it really does resound to what you just said. The question here reads, we've been following APIs for quite some time and think we have some pretty good ideas, but we'd like to start small to ensure success. Does SOA software offer any best practices or templates that match some of the business cases you described?
Yes, we have. So we have a number of different services that we offer that help you figure out what your API strategy should be. We have a number of templates. We have ebooks that describe how to build an appropriate API. And we can help you put into place a platform and an API strategy really, really quickly, either as a service or on-premise.
And when you say quickly, many of our attendees here are either integration professionals or SOA people, as you mentioned, Alistair. How quickly could you expect that they might get a handle on that and follow some of your good best practice advice?
Well, to set up a platform, and what I mean by that is a branded developer portal with potentially OAuth services and developer engagement support kind of activities, that's a very short period of time. I mean, bar the branding itself, it can be up and running in minutes for our customers. I think where the largest time is spent is in three different areas. The first one, of course, is the API definition and how to actually map that API definition to some back-end systems. And there, the tooling really helps you do it as quickly as possible with the least amount of custom coding possible. The second part is documentation. So the platform that we provide supports a lot of different documentation formats and helps you actually get started and write your documentation effectively in a way that developers understand and recognize. The third part is how do you manage all your legal agreements and your sign-on agreements and your legal statements and things like that. And those are things that we can help customers with. We have templates, we have best practices, and we have a platform that supports the developer engagement activities around legals. So I think that we really are well positioned to help our customers get started and get up and running as quickly as possible.
And just in these last few minutes, Alistair, that focus on the entire go-to-market ecosystem of the API, not just the technical aspect, that's got to be pretty valuable to your customers, I would think, that it helps put IT and the line of business on the same page much quicker, and you actually think of the API almost as a product.
Yes, I mean, you have to go out and advertise it. You have to go and promote it. You need your business support to package it as a product. If you're a laptop company, or whatever the case might be, you need to think of that as another one of your products. And it really has to embrace your brand, it has to embrace your market value, and it needs to be promoted, supported, and marketed actively by the organization, or else it's not going to be successful.
Really exciting that you've put together at SOA Software the tools, not just for the developer, but for creating this sort of business ecosystem around an API. Alistair Farquharson, CTO at SOA Software, thanks very much for a really insightful session here at Cloud Content Integration and Web API, and especially for taking so many questions from both sides of the house. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vance.